Great. Welcome, everyone. Backstage, we kind of discussed this is going to be a free-flowing conversation. We have a few themes because the topic is super broad. It's about AI, the role of AI in data-driven decision-making. AI is a very useful tool in data-driven decision-making. In the past decade, we got very good with labeling, prediction, looking for patterns in the data. More recently, with generative AI, this new tool is opening more opportunities for us. I think before we explore the frontiers and limitations, it's useful to probably box in what we're really talking about here. What do we mean by data-driven decision-making? There's data, there's decision. Maybe let's start with you, Yunzong.
Oh, yeah. So I think that's a really interesting question because when we talk about AI, right? So actually, if you look at deep learning, I always say majority of deep learning, they're built on decision theory. So like all that predictives, like max likelihood estimate and all that, they're based on decision theory. So it's like decision making everywhere. But then if you look at how we make decisions, that's actually kind of disconnected from AI. I think even for the most part, because we were talking about like how the company make a decision, right? How you make a marketing decision. Those things are not repeatable. So it's totally different from the decision-making for AI system where they can draw conclusions from a lot of data. And then we can repeat that process, like we can test the hypothesis. So I would say those things are kind of disconnected. It's been there for long, like this distinction has been there for a very long time. But then really, I think right now people are trying to close the gap. For example, my company, we run like social intelligence. Basically, we gather all the rumors, all the discussions on Twitter, and then we try to generate insights and trying to automate the decision-making process for more non-repeatable stuff. That's better. And then I remember, I think we're also talking to Paul, like they're generating like user embeddings, basically trying to automate the process of product decisions. So I'm seeing like with the advancing AI, like the gap is getting closer and closer, and then we're in a very exciting state right now.
Interesting. Paul, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to think about examples. The one that I often will think about is the progress of how we make decisions, how decisions are made in financial markets, specifically in trading and public markets. I think you can think of the classic example of decision-making in the movie Wall Street from the late 80s. And it's just a bunch of people on a floor, sort of similar to this, and yelling. And they're all basing it on decisions that are maybe behind the scenes, doing a bunch of analysis, and then combining that with some gut call of like buy now, sell now. By around 2002, I think something like 10% of the sort of trades in a public market were algorithmic. It was model-driven.
Yeah.
Definitely more were analytics-driven, but that were outputted by a model that said buy now at this price point. And then that rapidly escalated. And then through the financial crisis, I think by about 2011, 2012, something like 80% of the public market trades were algorithmic. Mm-hmm. Now it's even higher, and a lot of it, most of it is high frequency. But if you think about the decision under the hood there, you have to buy, you have to sell, and you have to make this decision. And if you think about the components of a decision, what you care about is the counterfactual. What would have happened if you had made a different decision? And that's often what prevents organizations, I think, from going that route of sort of saying, well, what would have happened if we'd done it based on this data, but also based on some other process. Trading is a very clean process where it's just you ultimately have a buy and you have a sell, and so you can kind of actually programmatically all the way through the actual implementation of the decision, rather than just, yes, we want to do it, but you now have to actually do it. And then once you do it, it's not ended, because there's another decision after the fact. Once you've bought, you have to decide when to sell. Once you've sold, you have money. You have to put it back into the market. So it's this continuous process. But the patterns within it are very repeatable, I think, to the point that was made here. And there's not too many other endeavors in life that have had, I think, in the world right now, that have had that clean of a process and that rapid of a process from very human to very machine-enabled or driven. Performance marketing is one of those. Lending is an example where that hasn't happened, where you have a decision about a person's creditworthiness, but usually most lending happens ultimately through a risk office, a risk team that are really guiding those things. I think I agree that we're a ways off from agentic, kind of where an AI system is actively not just suggesting a decision, but implementing it and carrying it all the way through, and then dealing with the repercussions and measurement and ROI estimate afterwards.
So we touched on a couple of points. One is this highly repeatable, highly automatable process like trading. What do you think is holding back from some other process becoming more and more sort of, automated process driven by AI? You touch on lending, right? Because there are pockets of analytics driving those decisions. What's holding us back from becoming more fluent in that process?
Thanks, John. I think that when I look at AI journey, right, company wants to solve, or any organization wants to solve 4 problems, actually. Increase revenue, increase profit, increase revenue, improve customer experiences, and make sure your compliance to regulatory. These 4 problems are there like 100 years ago. They're there now as well. What has happened in the field of AI is that the number of digital footprints associated to make decisions in these 4 teams have increased. Hence, the role of data-driven decision-making makes sense, right? But when you track the AI history, we are, when you come from maybe 30, 40 years ago, we call it insights. That means that don't even worry about decisions. So tell me what is happening right now. That's insights, right? And then further, we are moved into the AI taking some decisions. But when we look at the spectrum in the field of AI, or to the AGI, which is artificial general kind of like intelligence. So we are nowhere near to the Skynet, where like Arnold Schwarzenegger does the whole world, right? We are nowhere near that. We are very much in the field, I would say, it's called narrow AI, which I call as augmented intelligence. That means a human still in the loop in most scenarios. Where the scenarios where it's completely data-driven, for example, fund management is one of them, and cybersecurity is one of them, where there's significant amount of data-based decision. You have got into an autonomous intelligence phase, but we are very much in a narrow AI where humans in an impact. Not because of AI is not powerful. AI will become powerful, and AI will get more compute power, more capability. Gen AI, we can think like a human. But what will stop us, or what should stop us, is the how it impacts human, and how the change management accepts, how the people accept the AI in the organization. Those things will stop us, and kind of rightly so as well. So that's why we're not going to have a straight curve like this. We're going to have a little bump and up, but we will move in that direction. But at least for the time being, I would say the augmented intelligence will still be the main focus. We are going towards autonomous intelligence in few areas, but not much. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that. I think I haven't quite got the answer from that description. I understand basically we have probably what's more short-termly, in the short term achievable. I want to go back to what you guys were saying. So the sweet spot of applying AI in this almost straight through decision making feels like a good example is trading, where abundance of data is there, repeatable process, decision is a simple thing, buy, sell. I thought the analogy for lending is similar, abundance of data, scorecard. land, no land. What's difference in that process?
Well, we can highlight it by looking at just one more example. It'll
Yeah.
kind of like discriminate the space a little bit of the analysis. So I think there's a really interesting paper maybe a year ago about the use of diagnosis in radiology. So cancer screening, other things where you're looking at basically an image of part of a person's body, and you're making a decision based on it.
Yeah.
And when they looked at the general rated accuracy, the models were pretty good. In fact, in a couple of places, we're slightly beating the panel of doctors that we're being judged against. And note that this is really important because this is the part of the counterfactual is what is your baseline? Your baseline can't be one doctor because one doctor is going to get it wrong. There's sort of variance there. So you take a panel of doctors and you take the average or some summary of their decisions. They were getting it right, but when they looked at a trial of the actual attempt to implement that within the hospital, there was an extremely high rejection rate. Now, I don't know if you think about what humans are good at, I have a 2- and a 4-year-old, and what I've come to realize very clearly is that humans are very good at ignoring things, and in the set of things that we're good at ignoring, instructions are there. And so the problem is that as a doctor, I can just say, no, I don't buy that because there's some other data set or some other experience that I have that's not represented in the data set, and so I reject. Now, you could sort of say that's what happened in lending. My previous company was a consumer lending company in India, and we saw this over and over again, where our vision was to use alternative data and you could underwrite. And then consistently, the risk officers who were responsible for the overall capital would say, no, wait a second, we need to put these rules in place. And you'd say, well, the point of the model is to help us move past that rule. That rule is limiting. It's limiting the set of people that we can lend to. It's limiting our ability to actually improve our risk model over time. But they're like, no. So this rejection process is in the fact that, well, once you've lent, you have to now evaluate over time. Was it a good decision or not? Similarly, when you're assessing someone's health, there's a lot of missing counterfactuals. Now you kind of do a diagnosis. If you're going to diagnose chemotherapy, you don't know if you got it wrong because you've already started the process, right? So you don't know what the counterfactual was. I think that process of realizing that decisions are really distributed over time. They're not simple one-off, clean things that you can then evaluate the success rate or not. That's more of like a toy model, not the real dynamics of life. So I think in both of those cases, it just stems from our ability to sort of ignore those decisions, look past them, and also evaluate them more holistically. My sense is that in health, we will increasingly rely on models and AI, but what will have to happen is the counterfactual becomes so clear that not doing that is preventing diagnosis, is preventing positive health outcomes. And maybe it's because the scale of humans is not big enough. So the cost of a human reading a diagnosis is too high, and you just know that there's this large field of people that aren't getting diagnosed because of it. So there has to be the weight of the cost of not using data and AI in the process that I think will drive you to adopt it. Until that happens, it's like, we just continue to ignore and kind of pursue the normal path that we follow as organizations.
Yeah,
Right.
well, I would be more optimistic here because I think counterfactual inference is one statistical technique that's been out there for a while. And in the field of medicine, for example, there are stuff like molecular dynamics, we've got simulation methods and all that to be able to generate better counterfactual data. So I think intrinsically, though, the gap comes from the fact that for all of that, even for counterfactual inference, you have an objective function that optimizing, right? So you know what you want. You can express that mathematically. But then there's this dimension of human value. Sometimes you don't know what you want. For example, when I was a manager at Meta, every cycle we try to optimize this combination of matrices to set a goal for the next quarter. I'll be like, what exactly? We don't know exactly what the user wants. There's the click, there's the conversion, there's all that, right? So sometimes, funny thing, we even call that value model. So we build a model. We build we handcraft a model that we optimize for that reflects our value. But we don't know if it's good, good or bad. So that's like a value problem. It gets a little bit philosophical.
Can I jump on that point, though? As much as it feels philosophical, it's not a step you can skip in terms of setting the objective correctly. So General Atlantic has the advantage of investing in a couple of hundred or so portfolio companies, and they're right across the spectrum of data richness, from ByteDance probably right at the top end to, I don't know, Torchy's taco shop in Texas being like right at the other extreme. And we had an example in the portfolio recently where one of our companies, naturally, they're a fashion retailer, they wanted to maximize trade margin through markdowns in the mid-season sale that they were going to run. And they duly attempted to estimate elasticity curves. They had some, but not perfect visibility of stock. And a pure trade margin objective function started to run riot, setting markdowns for these products without too many constraints in place. And I think people began to realize the obvious implications of that objective function, unconstrained, after the fact, after it was deployed. Some of our best items, these were fashion items that you could definitely have continued to sell after the sale, that could have continued on to the next season. Because they had the best elasticity, they were the things that were being marked down the most. They were crazy discounts, but the volume uplift was so high that it made sense. So we immediately stocked out of some of our best items that we could and probably should have actually continued to skim for the remainder of the season, right? And it's an imperfect objective function, but it's also an imperfect optimization window. We were optimizing over a sale period, and we were maximizing margin through a sale period as opposed to over a remainder of a season where we, and the merchants at the fashion brand knew that they actually had more time to sell through the stock. So defining that objective function is key, and it gets right back to the question of how to make a great data-driven decision. We talk about the ingredients of like having data or not, and then applying a model and having some model or not, and like the human capital, the skills, the compute to actually execute on it. But we invest in companies right across the maturity curve from startups through to highly developed companies, and we are often in the position of having to take a step back with them and force the conversation. What are we really trying to achieve here? Before then, analyzing what actually are the ingredients that we have to work with.
So we're talking about pointing AI at the right decision point, right? Like figuring out what you're really trying to achieve with AI, this technology. You touch on like a couple of points. I think one is, yes, for the problem at hand, data needs to be there. Some of the data are more easily accessible, like trading. And then other examples, data is there. The healthcare, the imageries are there. But what's more tricky is probably how you get the time window for you to get that counterfactual evidence, how to define the objective function there. I know in your line of work, you also leveraging data that's probably previously not so accessible. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think, so ultimately a lot of decisions are made by human. And then I think, but the problem with humans is that you cannot process so much data. For example, in Kaito AI, we try to generate marketing insight or trade decisions for people in the crypto space. And then if you're like a crypto trader, there's just so much tweets. And then unlike traditional finance in crypto, like people are anonymous. Like you can't possibly track all that weird Twitter account associated with each project, and then all the other governance discussions and all that, right? And then, so those are unstructured data. It's not like it's not like a technical analysis where you're just looking at a few aggregated numbers, which human can process. So then I think the more and more people trying to be able to like convert all that unstructured data. Basically, we'll have machines to look at everything for you, and then translate them into some structured aggregate data, so that you can make a decision on. So I think that would be one example. To be more specific, for example, if you're like a narrative trader, if you're trading like AI coins, if you're like trading the ETF narratives and all that, like we pretty much just, you can run social intelligence to look at all the discussions, and then you can rank them based on their social network connectivities. And then after that, you generate them into one statistics. That's just the prevalence of this discussion. And then that's something that human can decide on. So we're not trying to solve the value problem in trading. And then we don't look at your portfolio, like how are you like a long-term, short-term investor? What's your financial goal? Those are hard, right? But I think at least we can do right now, we can help you track all that unstructured data. And then that, a lot of that thanks to the power of LLM that's able to understand more nuances. Like finally, some sort of AI that possesses some level of common sense, which was just extremely hard to do in the past. Anyone work on sentiment analysis from like 2015, 2017 is like just very, very hard to make it useful for anything like product analysis and trade decisions.
Does your technology take any decisions in isolation, or is there always like a human in the loop? And what are some of the decisions that the human is making with the insights that you're providing?
So maybe let me use quant trading, for example. Like there's one popular technique. This is a factor model, right? So you mine a bunch of combination of variables, and then you aggregate them with like a linear model to make a decision. So, but then the linear model eventually maybe they generate it with some regression. But then the important is factor, because that's what encodes a lot of unstructured data, like higher dimensional data. And then what we do, we generate the factors. For example, we help you understand what's the prevailing narrative, what's the score of its prevalence on social network. But then we don't generate trade decisions for you because that's like a really hard problem. And then the thing is, we can, but then that requires, like I said, this one extra dimension of value. Like what you try to get out of your trade, right? Are you trying to, what's your risk tolerance and all that? That's like kind of gets a little bit philosophical, and I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah. It's interesting to think, like most of us in personal lives, when we're thinking about personal decisions, I mean, that's where a lot of when I talk to investors or when I'm investing in startups, it's like a lot of times we're so focused on the open AIs and the personal chat interfaces that we're all exploring with, and then thinking about the sci-fi implications of how we integrate those into our lives. Most people's personal lives are very non-repeatable, as in your decisions you're making on a day-to-day basis are just very non-repeatable. But I think there's a tremendous amount of progress being made in enterprises, in businesses, where there's much more structure to the decision, much more repeatability. And I think that's where, so Alex is like highlighting the fact that our capacity as humans to process data is not very good, it's not very high. That's an opportunity. When I moved to India in 2014, I was vice president of data science at a big real estate platform in India called housing.com. And the problem was, like in India, because of the infrastructure of cities, it's very hard to get around. It's very hard to cross the cities. In fact, when I first moved there, we didn't even have Uber, so it's really difficult. And so when you think about a problem like consumer real estate, you're trying to decide where to live. It's a huge investment in time to have to go and physically look at a set of houses across the course of a weekend. So it's just like clearly a subpar experience. It makes it very difficult. It reduces mobility. There's a lot of reduces quality of life. So the idea of bringing that online meant all of a sudden is that you could make decisions, you could evaluate things, and evaluate your life choices much more efficiently because you could just go online and look at a bunch of houses, right? Now, the challenge for that behind the scenes is that you have to bring those physical places online in a structured way that's accurate, transparent, et cetera. And now you have all these other forces that are kind of clouding the process because they have their own incentives. So you have brokers who really just want to gather leads so they can talk to customers and sell what they have. And so they figure out how to game the system, and they realize that if they put up really attractive photos, more people will call them, they'll talk to them, they'll try to sell them. So now as a business, in order to actually deliver on that improved quality experience of saving people time, you have to find a way to scale to millions of listings with millions of photos and find a way of somehow ensuring the quality of those photos. So to hire somebody to look at every one of those photos and say, is that consistent? Do these two photos look like they're from the same flat? Are they attractive? Are we just repeating the same photos across multiple flats? that becomes a decision that is just not done well by people.
Yeah.
It's much better done by AI. So that is where there's a huge amount of progress. But then even there, you can then realize that like the concept of a decision, the word decision, it's just a linguistic artifact. There's no such thing. You can't point to a decision like you can point to a vase of flowers.
Yeah.
It's a construct that represents a series of things that we're doing as humans in the world. And so, like, one of my favorite mathematicians, G. Polya, he says if you have a complex problem, first break it into a smaller, less complex problem complex problem you don't understand, first break it into a simpler problem you don't understand. So it's always taking this big decision of, is this a fraud listing, and just sort of asking a simpler question, which is this a fake picture or not? And then that becomes just sort of this sort of biteable, bite-sized problem that you can then apply an algorithm against, and you can apply the power of processing that you couldn't otherwise. But it's never like, oh, this decision we've automated. It's just this small part of this decision, which is a sub-decision, which has more sub-decisions. And it's always just sort of, regressive.
I'd like to interject, and thanks for pointing out here, right? I think that, and I like to call it as a decisioning rather than a decisions. Because the decisioning is a chain of process. We are making multiple decisions in that process, right? And multiple positions, we can have fully AI, partially AI, human intelligence, all of that, right? I think that the example Paul brought out, to buy a home. Buy a home is a very personal decision. I mean, for example, if you take an e-commerce, people are very comfortable buying online right now. The person buying a home is very personalized. So we're not going to automate the entire buying home decision through AI, not because of AI capability. The AI capability is there. Today, you can do a 3D viewing, you can do almost everything what a human can do in AI. But because of the human touch points we would need, and we want to improve the experience of decisioning, right? I think don't have to drive around 2 hours to find a house, kind of a thing. And that's where both the data and AI plays a role. It's about the decisioning process and how do we influence each segment of the decision assets.
So what I heard from that is we have decisioning is a process. Let's break it down into tasks. AI is good at doing tasks. Data processing is probably at front end of making that decision. Sounds like you made amazing progress. People, depending on who you believe, they say 80% of a company's data is unstructured. If you find a way of processing that, all of a sudden you have a lot more that you can go by, and that is not something for a human easily processable. So, and then I guess fast forward is, if we break things into chunks, there are elements highly repeatable. Sounds like what we're saying is that's where AI sweet spot we should apply. I'd like to hear from Jesse a bit more. I think in your line of business, one, you want to see really quick feedback from your investors. Two, you're looking at a lot of different companies, but they probably all share some commonality.
For sure.
Yeah.
So in an investment fund, I think it's just inevitable to expect quick growth, or to hope for quick growth, and to push for quick growth. And for highly repeatable decisions where kind of the data assets are already kind of in place and they're just not being leveraged, I think you can deliver value very quickly. But what takes time, just building on what the others have been saying, is actually designing a process around a model where the model is imperfect and only is able to deal with subtasks, and perhaps the data is imperfect and needs to deal with subtasks as well. A great example comes from a different fashion retailer we have in the portfolio, and it was the simple or common problem of forecasting demand for a fashion item next season. And fashion is a famously hard problem because, I mean, these jeans are probably very predictable, but whether it'll be the lapels of this thickness or a different thickness that actually sell next season on a jacket is actually quite a hard one, and where human intuition is super important. And there won't be good signal in the data that says, given this sold last season in blue, whether it's going to sell this season in blue, or it might be a different blue or black or orange or whatever it is. We spent some time with this fashion retailer squeezing all the juice we could out of past demand levels for different fashion items. We built a similarity model that says the new assortment is similar in these ways to the old assortment, so this is how much we can learn. And we got to a respectable accuracy. We were able to purchase quantities that back testing showed were between sort of 30 to 40% of what actually takes place in demand, which was an improvement on the baseline of the human, like, oh, we could buy this much, and let's hope that it works, and if it's not working, then we'll just push it harder in marketing. The process we then built around that model, because we weren't particularly happy with 30 to 40% error, was to then actually line the designers up and force a meeting and get them to rank from top to bottom per category the SKU that they think will be the #1 seller down to the number 10, and then the long tail of SKUs. It turns out the fashion designers were actually very accurate on the top 10, less accurate on the long tail, and using that ranking as a predictor in our model, we were suddenly playing in the 15 to 20% error rate, and that was then obviously a very strong basis for optimizing purchases. The other element of the process we built in was, we have time to make 2 purchases and 2 kind of drops of stock. So if we can make 1 purchase early in the season and then collect further data through early sales to then further optimize how big the second drop of inventory should be, accuracy is even higher. And it's these discussions that I often have with my investment colleagues who are like, well, you've implemented demand prediction, right? So now we're gonna land at this much higher accuracy, and there won't be any stockouts anymore. It's like, well, yes, but we've also designed and we're implementing a process, and process implies change management and data creation over time. Models get better over time as we build a richer, back-tested kind of history as well to work with in subsequent seasons. So this is the kind of circle that we try to square with our investors and process problems that need solving in our portfolio. There's an opportunity here to reduce stockouts and optimize the quantities that we buy. There is some data there, not perfect, but there's also value in the human intuition that up until this point has been entirely driving the process. It's not like they were purchasing stock amounts at random. And so designing a process that captures the value of the human decision, but supplements it with AI to raise the average quality of the decision overall, particularly in the long tail, focusing human intuition on those top 10 SKUs or the top 10%, that's what really moves the needle. And so, as a value creation team, so I sit within the value creation team of GA, we never approach a problem one-dimensionally. It's never just a data science problem. It's a broader operational efficiency change management program or a go-to-market change management program, and there's process, there's talent involved, there's playbooks, there's data building, and eventually there's models. I'd say my favorite model is not a mathematical one, it's the AI hierarchy of needs.
I love it, putting human insights and machine together to achieve the best outcome. I think that's a winning formula. And you also touched on to drive real-world change. There's process change. There's a lot of things. That's the model that the machine is just this little part in the middle. Guru, you would like to chime in on that?
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Right. I think I would advise still, like you started the conversation, right? I think that companies still trying to solve only 4 problems: increase revenue, increase profit, improve experience, customer experience, and make sure you are compliant, right? Don't have fraud and other things. So we are still only solving these 4 problems. It's not an AI problem. It's actually AI solving some of these problems, right? So more and more, I would say AI will become reality into the decision making, right? I would say keep human-centered AI decisioning. That it doesn't mean the human has to be in the loop, but all AI processes have to be human-centered. I mean, how human will perceive the decision has to be there in the center of the design as such. And we're not going to automate every processes. And again, not because of AI capability, because it's not needed. And then we are only automating part of the decisioning process, and eventually we will get there to automate the entire decisioning process. But I will look at, how do we make sure that the experience of decisioning is data-driven and then and human-centered. I would say that.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our panel discussion. I think this has been really insightful. I certainly have learned a lot. I would like to probably change gear a little bit. Let's look to the future, because we discussed a lot of real-life example, what is already achievable now. It's almost hard to imagine a world without AI and try to make data decision-making today, right? But if we look forward, maybe from Jesse, one by one, give us your top 2 and 3, be it prediction or your aspiration for AI to even play a more impactful role in the world of data-driven decision.
It's a big question. I think the point I'm going to make is probably a little bit naff for the people in this room, because I think we're the privileged group that spend a lot of time with AI. We live in and we play with the richest data sets in general, and we build awesome models off the back of it. But the change that I've seen happen recently, with the fame of ChatGPT and Gen AI causing a fresh craze that we're all now living through, is that I'm not alone anymore in my firm as the only person who's talking about data as an asset that needs to be deliberately built, and and thinking quite clearly about the value of this asset, not just in terms of number of observations, but richness of observations, diversity of observations as well. Back to my favorite fashion example, right? If you're trying to estimate an elasticity curve across markdowns, if you've only ever tried 50% off, you've only actually got one data point to work with, rather than this nice curve of discount levels. And so I think the thing that's changing and has become popularized, and that I think will be the key enabler for all of us to be even busier than we already are in the future, is that non-technical professionals are now thinking quite deliberately and clearly about building data assets for us to work with.
Yeah, I will echo on Jesse's point, maybe make a weird statement. I think sometime from now, we'll still be sitting here talking about the role of AI, whatever, in decision making. And we will still be like, there's still a huge gap. But then the thing that's changing is that a lot of things are automated decisions that, like the scope, the kind of decision making that we're talking about get narrower, because a lot of things are automated that we don't realize. For example, now we're talking about quant trading. Like, we still think about it as a decision making process, but maybe sometime in the future we just think that's just an algorithm doing their job. That's not like, we don't consider it decision making anymore because it becomes trivial. And then, for example, content recommendation. That is a decision making. Like in the past, people hire analysts and all that. Like they curate the content for you, but now it's all generated algorithmically, and we don't call that process decision making anymore, right? And then I think when we talk about like human organizations, where like they're more integrated with machines, so I call them like machine in the loop system. But right now, there's some human in the loop system. Right? So machine in the loop system will become human in the loop system, and then fully automated system. So then the set of automated decisions getting wider and wider. A lot of counterfactual problems. We will have better simulation data and all that. And then it's just gonna be baked into like every like day-to-day life. Think about like the 2015, 2017 when the big data revolution started, right? And then right now, all that decisions, even like a non-technical person, they're talking about like, where's your data? Like we look at the chart. So it's just gonna be baked into like everyday process. But then there's still gonna be a set of problems that we consider decision making that we're talking about. We're like, hey, when can this be automated? But something that people might start forgetting is that a huge space of decision making already automated that we don't call them decision making anymore. It's just algorithms.
Okay, so we have more pervasive adoption outside of the AI community, invisible decision making in the background. We have a few seconds.
Yeah. Well, just building off Jesse's last example, the problem with predicting fashion, for example, is I would argue actually is less of an algorithm problem, more of a data problem. We've been living in the last 10 years or whatever, we called it the age of big data, but I would argue, my prediction is that like, that's nothing. Actually, we've not been living in the world of big data. We've been living in a world of extremely shallow, poor quality data, and it's going to explode. If you think about fashion, the thing we build models over is content inventory that will tell you something like, it won't even tell you labels. It'll give you some generic kind of like category of a suit jacket and a color and a price and a brand.
Yep.
And the thing that the fashion person is making a decision about is a much richer, granular data set. They're looking at it and they're seeing all of these. There's 180,000 words in the English language. So many of them are being used to describe the fabric and the hang and all of these things, and the human is incorporating it. But the models don't have any access to any of that because it's not in the data. All they have is very thin data, just the category, the brand, the color, nothing. So what we can do is take things like images and explode the number of variables that we can learn on. We can then expose those variables. Take shopping, right? Don't look for shopping on Amazon. Go to TikTok. And if you look at how people talk about fashion on TikTok, it's rich. It's like young people will be talking about, am I English country or glitzy street? Glitzy street, what does that mean? It won't show up in any inventory from Walmart or Amazon, not at all. But it's how the people are representing their preferences. They're grouping and describing different characteristics of clothes into that category, and then that's determining whether they like it or not. Our AI doesn't have access to any of that right now, but we can generate that data over time, and we will, and our interfaces will generate it over time, and then they'll expose it to people the same way TikTok is, and then they'll learn from the responses to those. So I see us getting dramatically better, but big part of that will be because we get dramatically better at generating, actually creating, not passively collecting, but creating really high quality, but exponentially increased data. We've seen nothing. The next 10 years, AWS, Microsoft, they're going to make a lot of money unless we figure out another way to store data, but we're not even close, which I think is exciting.
Exciting. Big data, gigantic data.
Now, maybe 5 seconds, or maybe 5, 10 seconds. The future is here. The AI is going to be here, and number of AI interventions in the entire organization is kind of going to improve. I mean, and it's a journey. It's not like we are looking at a North Star that's where AI will reach. It's a journey, so it's going to be there. If you are building an organization of AI, look at AI, but answer to your question is not AI. Answer to your question is data. Look at your data carefully, and how do you harness the data? Don't be swayed by the lot of models and things. Most of the answers stays in data, and the model can do the job for you.
Okay. Brilliant. I think here's a wrap. Very good. Thank you very much, everybody.